Today, we're going to talk about audiophile pressings. They've been around since the mid to late 70s and have grown over time, especially with the resurgence of vinyl over the last 10 to 15 years. But just how good are they? Do they really sound better? Are they worth the price difference? We'll cover that all next on The Sound of Safe and Sound, Texas. Welcome back. I'm David Bianco with The Sound of Safe and Sound, Texas. Today's topic is one I've wanted to cover since I started the channel back on March 1st, and it's been an area of vinyl that's been near and dear to my heart for literally for decades. I can remember getting introduced to this in the late 70s when I was living in Denver, Colorado. I had a favorite hi-fi store. Remember those things, hi-fi stores? And they had all the best high-end equipment and mid-end equipment, and they sold records, especially higher-end records. A lot of times those were classical music type cuts and things of that nature, or potentially imports from other countries. And then all of a sudden there's something came along called these half-speed masters by a company called Mobile Fidelity Sound Labs out of Chatsworth, California. And these were very, very interesting because the theory here is that a record being cut at half speed and the tape being played at half speed, when that cutting was done on the mastering lathe, it actually could cut a more accurate image onto the platter because it went a bit slower, and that degree of accuracy then translated into a better sound once you played it. So this was kind of the start of all this, but it really had a little bit of a genesis before that a lot of people don't know. And that is how half-speed mastering came to be is basically through the development of quadrophonic records. But not just any quadrophonic records. They were specifically the type that were called CD4, what they called discrete 4-channel. RCA was big in it. Japan Victor developed this. JVC developed this. And it was also used very heavily by Warner Electra Atlantic at the time in the mid-70s. 74, 75 in that genre. There were other types of 4-channel, but they didn't require this special cutting. I'll do a special episode on 4-channel specifically. But just to understand that the concept of this came out of CD4 manufacturing. And the reason is, briefly, the CD4 creates a signal at a very high signal over the hearing frequency, and it is the carrier signal that the demodulator, which you plug into the turntable, decodes basically the channels and separates them with this carrier signal, which is at a very high pitch. Well, you couldn't cut that high pitch unless you did it at half speed, got it down to half of that frequency. So that is how this was born out. So Mobile Fidelity came to be, and what they did is they licensed existing records that had been released, and they got the rights to reproduce those and remaster those. These masterings were always done in Japan at JVC specifically because that in fact was where it was designed and formulated. The type of vinyl that they used, which they called virgin vinyl, was not allowed in the U.S. because of some chemical properties that it had, and so this all had to be done in Japan. So let me give you an example. Here is a Mobile Fidelity release of Poco's Legend. Great album, by the way. If you want to see what an MFSL, Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab, or MOFI they're called now, and what a half-speed master sounds like. This is a great one to pick up used. It's not that expensive. A lot of them are, but this one isn't. And this one was MFSL number 1-020. So this was the 20th release by Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab. Okay. And this is a great sounding record, and it is in fact a sealed one, so I can't open it up and show you it. But it basically was well made in terms of the vinyl. It was very pure. Let me grab one that is open so I can show you something with it. All right. Here's Fleetwood Mac's Fleetwood Mac album, and this is just a fantastic sounding pressing. And it is a Mobile Fidelity, and I'm going to take it out of the jacket because I want to show you something about the vinyl. They had a nice cardboard fold here. It talked about an audiophile's dream come true, and it explained their process. These are limited edition, limited supplies, as it said, and their logo at the bottom said, "You ain't heard nothing yet." Maybe a forebearer to Bachman Turner Overdrive and stealing their thunder on that, but this record here is what's called virgin vinyl. And so you can actually see light through the record. I'm not sure if it's going to come up here. If not, I'll put an image up to show you. But this is so pure that you can see light from the other side of this record. And again, these were just very, very fabulous sounding pressings. This particular album just is, it's on my never sell list. I have my database of records, and this one's on a never sell. I would never sell this MOFI because it sounds so fabulous. So, so they took great care of making these and then selling them only pretty much in hi-fi shops. And these went for the ridiculously outrageous price of about $16.98 at the time, believe it or not. Go look up on Discogs what this costs now. You don't want to know. Could be triple figures. I'm sure some are. So that is basically what a half-speed master was, and that was really the beginning of the audiophile journey. And again, we always had imports coming in from UK, from Japan, and we've had different discussions about that. Japanese pressing sounding cleaner in the sense that they definitely had less surface noise, better quality vinyl. The quality of the vinyl is very critical because that's going to determine how quiet the noise floor is on the recording. And you best obviously can tell this when you're on the lead-in groove before the music starts, between tracks on a record where, let's say, the section of the music is very quiet, you'll hear that noise. So this virgin vinyl was really a big deal. And it was really a big deal because in the 70s, a lot of the vinyl, as I've told you, in the US was kind of junk because of the gas crisis and the oil crisis, and PVC is made from as a component of that. So a lot of recycling of vinyl was done in the US, which was really trashy. So Mobile Fidelity is one of the big players for 40 plus years now. And there are now players here in the space in the US and beyond that are also involved that I'm going to mention. Analog Productions, or AP. You can see this, get out of the light a bit. Okay, Analog Productions. It's a QRP, and that's a pressing plant that is pressing these for them. And these are very good quality, very high quality records, very quiet records. And let's say this one, for example, The Doors' LA Woman. This is actually pressed not at half speed, but what they do on this one is it is cut at 45 RPM. So actually, when you play this, you play it at 45 RPM, and what that does is they spread the number of tunes on this across 4 platters. In other words, 4 sides and 2 discs is what they put this across. So there's less songs per side, but they are spaced out more, and so they are allowed, the cut can be more spaced and more accurate, giving you more room, because the tighter the cut is, the less you can cut those really, really aggressive bass type notes, and so that causes a decrease in quality. So here's an Analog Production record. This one, if you can get it new when it's released, I think it's out of print now, is about $55. I think their retails have gone up now to 60, but like this one's probably over 100 now on the resale market because of its unavailability. So Analog Productions is another great company that puts these out. They're not half speed, but they are very high quality. Another company here, show you, this is The Captain and Me by the Doobie Brothers, and this is a company called Speaker's Corner. They're out of Germany, and they basically create audiophile recordings, and they use the original master tapes. This is really one of the critical differentiators in audiophile recordings, using original master tapes, as opposed to copies or digital or whatever it might be. So this says very specifically, this LP is an entirely analog product, okay, made from the original analog master tapes. Only the best mastering studios are used, pure analog, 180-gram virgin vinyl pressings from Palace, Germany, P-A-L-L-A-S. We'll talk about Palace pressings in a minute. Faithful reproduction of original artwork and labels, all licenses are paid, etc. So these are, to me, these represent the best buys on the market if you can find them. They're out of Germany, but for me, they are the best value, 35 bucks for this, and you won't need a different copy of this. That's a great example. So so that's another example of an audiophile recording, and audiophile coming from Analog Productions. So you can look at their catalog on analogproductions.com and look at what they have for offerings. They repress quite a bit, and they have a pretty extensive catalog. There was another company in the 80s that competed with Mobile Fidelity a bit, called Nautilus. And so they had Nautilus half-speed mastering series, so they picked up on this same capability and technology. And here's an example of one of my favorite albums, Dreamboat Annie by Heart. And it really does sound fabulous in this format. Really, really better than even the original OG of this on Mushroom Records. This definitely sounds better. Back in the day, this went for about 20 bucks. So you can tell these definitely, when you look at the current prices, have grown in terms of cost. Nautilus isn't in business anymore. So if you look for their stuff, it's going to be all stuff that's used, probably maybe a few sealed things out there still, but excellent, excellent recordings. Just, it was something that they got licensed that maybe Mobile Fidelity didn't get licensed. So it was kind of, they were picking up, although, you know, like Nautilus did Rumors by Fleetwood Mac, and so did Mobile Fidelity. So sometimes both were done. Japanese, we talked about Japanese pressings and the quality of those. Whether you call those audiophile or not, that's, you know, okay, that's they're definitely an import to us. I store them with my audiophile recordings, so I guess I consider them a cut above because of that. Typically, the vinyl's cleaner and the noise floor is lower. They're more quiet, and the pressings often sound good. Many times they don't necessarily quite have as deep a bass as what US pressings do, and they're more focused on the clarity of the mid-range and the highs. So just as an example. But even within the Japanese, there were certain series. Like this is a Dark Side of the Moon, and this is what's called a Pro Use series that was done by Toshiba EMI. And this is a cut above with better vinyl and a better cutting process, mastering process. And this is my go-to copy for Dark Side of the Moon. I have a MOFI of it as well. And it's just, I want to say it's a toss-up. But typically, if I have the two laying out next to each other, I'll usually pull this one to listen to. So I guess that kind of tells you what you need to know. There are also some labels out now that are getting on the bandwagon, so to speak. And I'm going to mention one specifically, Intervention Records. Here's a Joe Jackson record. And they take great care as well in their pressings. It's 100% analog from the analog tapes, 180 gram dead quiet vinyl mastered by Kevin Gray at Coherent Audio. So Kevin Gray, like Bob Ludwig, is a master. He's one of the best. So if you see these, they're really impressive in terms of how they sound. So if you look at interventionrecords.com and you see these are really good, and they're about 40 to 50 bucks each as well. So those are just some examples. So let's talk about, are they worth it? Well, the first thing I would tell you is I would only get an audiophile copy of something, or consider one of an album I really, really liked. I mean, that for me would make the most sense. It doesn't make a lot of sense to me just because you have it in your collection. You have to have an audiophile version of everything. You usually get a little picky. Now, of course, not all albums have an audiophile release, so there's going to be times where you got to live with what you have. But I would say if you really, really like and enjoy an album, you definitely should then pursue whether it's a MOFI, half-speed master, or whatever. The other thing you can do, in some cases, of course, you can look and see reviews and kind of get a sense of how people feel about it. The problem with some of the releases coming out today is they go under what's called pre-order, and they have limited edition quantities. So if you want to wait until it's released, you may pay a premium to buy it then, because maybe they're all sold out on the pre-orders, and then people in the secondary market are marking them up a bit to make a bit of a profit on it. So sometimes that's something to consider. Personally, I mean, if I really like an album a lot, I will go for the higher end version. And I'm not even getting into talking about the mobile fidelity one-step versions and the UHQR versions here of what is done through Analog Productions as well, because those are really, really top tier, and those can be discussed separately. But again, and those go for 100 and 125 each, new. And again, you have to consider some things. Some people, when you have it cut at 45 RPM and you have 4 sides to a 2-sided LP, people don't like getting up every, 8 minutes or 9 minutes, or having 2 songs per side, or it's really annoying. So maybe some of the ones out there you really don't want to get in that format. Now, I will tell you that the one-steps have typically all been 2x45, 2 albums at 45 RPM. They are now starting to come out with a single disc for 33 RPM one-step. I think they've got an Alan Parsons coming out that way. And they just announced the Michael Jackson Thriller, which I covered, and it's a one-disc 33 RPM at $100 versus $125 for the 2 albums. So I think MOFI has heard some of the concerns in the market, and I think the Alan Parsons are actually cutting both ways. Because it's an audiophile album, the recording is so good, it's used for testing, the iRobot album. And so there's that aspect of it as well. So is it worth it? If you really like an album, it's really worth it to consider. Now, will I hear a difference? If your equipment is decent, yes, you will. Okay? The better the equipment, the more difference you will hear. Okay? But honestly, if you have a record player, that's a single one, and then it's the speakers are built in and everything, and I'll use the word Crosley as a generic name, but they sell a lot of them. But there's a lot of others, Victrola brand. I don't know that I'd spend the money on this, because I don't think you're going to hear much of a difference, frankly. I don't want to get into does it ruin the record more or whatever, but I just think that investment and that approach doesn't match the investment you've made. I would pour more money into my system, frankly, before I started buying audiophile records. That's just my opinion. I just don't think you're going to pick up the sonic difference as strongly as you would with better equipment. That being said, relatively average equipment, a turntable with a decent cartridge and an amp and some decent speakers, you will hear the difference. There's no doubt you will hear it. You know, you're going to hear something more defined than you ever heard before, especially on things you know well, songs you know well. You'll hear much more clarity in a voice. I know in the Eagles' first album when it came out on a one-step, I heard a depth of backup vocals that I'd never heard before. I heard guitar and banjo picks, literally picks that I never felt before. So I mean, you really can. And I mean, I don't have really high-end equipment like $1,000 turntables. My turntables are $200, $300, $400 type turntables. My cartridges are $100 cartridges. My amplifier is, a $300, $400 amplifier. Speakers are probably $500 a pair. I mean, I'm not in the thousands for each piece of equipment. So it's not like I'm playing it on something that's so high end. So, if you have what I would call a mid-grade type of a setup, you're definitely going to hear a difference. But again, spending the money on things that you really like, I think that's really important because, why spend $100 where you could get, at $10, 10 albums versus one? You need to kind of look at that. But if you really like an album and you really want to immerse yourself in it, enjoy it, it can be worth it. But again, it's you choosing and you deciding and you looking at your system and seeing whether you think it's up to it. So again, if you wanted to try this out and see how they sound, again, Poco Legend is a very inexpensive used mobile fidelity MFSL record that you could pick up, and even the original of it to get a used one in the, it's in almost in bargain bins, $3-4, so you could compare the two very easily. Great album, right? It's a Crazy Love, Heart of the Night, and the other songs. It's really there's not a bad song on that album actually. So it's a great album that I would promote just in general, regardless of it having a MOFI that's very reasonable. So that's an example of how you could try it out and see if you could hear the difference. And so I think you need to come to a conclusion of what do you really like and what do you want to listen to? What do you see yourself listening to over and over? And do you want to experience a much better version of it? And they're out there. Again, these are what are called audiophile albums. Some of these cuts, as I said, through whether they're just imports from Japan or whether they're just imports like from Japan or Germany, or even the UK. I mean, they are typically, I think all countries had kind of an ebb and a flow of quality, but the truth is some of these countries continue to press records all through the 80s and 90s and early 2000s. You look for a pressing of certain things. A lot of times you're going to find Germany did it and Brazil, ironically. Or UK and Brazil, for example. Just certain countries just kept going. This is a thing where Audiophile had a lull as well. Mobile Fidelity went bankrupt actually and got rebought, and then they're now owned by a company called Music Direct. musicdirect.com. They're actually in Chicago, and they are literally in the same facility that MFSL was in back in the 80s in Chicago. Same warehouse, same facility. So Mobile Fidelity is owned by Music Direct. So you can order their products through Music Direct or through MFSL, or it's called MOFI.com now. And the thing is that they are not doing half-speed masters now as their process. So although it's original master recording, they are cutting those at the same speed, and they are in fact still using virgin vinyl and now using a compound called super vinyl, which is even better. And they're coming from Japan. And so understand that the half-speed kind of aspect has started to change. There are half-speed masters coming out of Abbey Road Studios, you'll see. There's a controversy whether half speed really sounds better or not, or whether the frequency change that occurs during the slowing down and speeding up is an octave and it has an impact. If you look up half speed mastering in Kevin Gray, you're going to get his impression on it. He's not a fan and explains why, and I certainly can understand and see where his perspective. You'll see that Kevin Gray is not a fan, but I can see his perspective on it and why he says what he says. I always have to just look at what's there and what my ears tell me in my brain about what I'm hearing, and I can't always get caught up in all the technical genre in the background. But again, the half speed mastering that is being done today, we'll see some coming through Abbey Road Studios, and they are digitizing everything in that process, just FYI. So, you can argue it one way or the other on those. I'm not going to call those audiophile recordings, frankly, because I've listened to some and I don't consider them to be, in general, a cut above that much. But again, that's up to your ears. And I've listened to their engineer, well, how he's done it and what he's done. And from what I know and understand and from what I hear, it's not the process that, for me, gives a better sound. But again, that's for you to judge. But these audiophile recordings are out there. For something you really love, I'd say look into it. Give a few a try. But be aware, on the used market right now, some of them are very, very high priced. It's kind of like a peak market. So if you can find some that are newly pressed, ones that have come out recently, let me show you a couple of examples real quick. Here's one that came out, Hall & Oates, Rock and Soul Part 1. It's their greatest hits. Really well done. I don't know if it's better than the original Bernie Grundman pressing, but I can tell you it's great. And that's only like, I think, $35 or $40. So again, if it's an album you really like, it's probably worth the investment. But again, these are in fact not what I would call half speed masters, because they're not processed that way. There is a series that Mobile Fidelity has come out with, and one thing you have to look for is on here it says original master recording. See that on the very, very tippy top? Okay. Some say Mobile Fidelity Sound Lab on top. I know Cyndi Lauper's She's So Unusual, which I did a shootout on video, is an example. What that means is they aren't sure that what they had was the original master tape. They probably had a second generation copy, or some other situation came up where they will not put that particular moniker on there. So if you don't see original master recording on top, then know that there's a potential, that it's not maybe going to sound quite as good because of that. Now, again, some of these are nuanced differences, to be honest. But the point is, Mobile Fidelity won't say it's an original master recording unless it truly is that original master tape. So that's where things are at. I hope you found some of this interesting. It's a very broad and wide topic. We'll talk in another video more about the really high-end stuff like the UHQRs and the one-steps that are coming out. But these are kind of more the mid-range costs, the ones that are somewhat attainable, and they are something that I think one should consider. So again, as always, I appreciate you watching. If you did like this video, please hit the like button and hit the subscribe and the bell there for notifications when I release videos. And if you have any comments, please leave them. If you have any questions, please leave them. Or if you have any topics that you'd like to see covered, or maybe even specific albums reviewed, or input on differences in pressings, whatever it might be, whether I do a particular show on it or I will contact you more directly and reply to you, either way, I do appreciate you participating. So for now, this is David Bianco saying thanks for watching The Sound of Safe and Sound Texas. Take care, everybody.